A Soy Agronomy Field Day was held at B&M Crop Consulting in Coldwater on August 27th, funded through checkoff dollars from the Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee. 4 soybean experts shared the most current production issues and management tactics with growers from across Michigan and Canada. Fred Warner is the nematode diagnostician at Michigan State University. His presentation centered around the fact that soybean cyst nematode populations are changing across the state without obvious above-ground symptoms. He offered tips to both understanding the problem and ways to manage it.
For soybean cyst nematode management, really, it boils down to 2 primary tactics: rotation to non-host crops and growing soybean cyst nematode resistant varieties. So really, we're looking at rotation and resistant varieties. And that's why the fact that we're developing populations of soybean cyst nematode that are overcoming a lot of our resistance to soybeans, that's why it's becoming much more of a problem that we have to recognize and adjust to as soybean producers. One thing I know about every person in this audience today, no one has Superman's vision. No one can stare into the soil and tell me how many microscopic worms they have. So to best assess the numbers, you should collect soil samples and plant tissue samples and send them into the lab. From there, based on the numbers, we'll then provide management recommendations as to how we feel, at least, it's the best way to manage the soybean cyst nematode.
Bill Bauer is the B in B&M Crop Consulting. His presentation had attendees pulling soybeans and looking at different R factors, the reproductive stages of the plant. He also addressed management plans at different stages of growth, as well as some pests to be on the lookout for this year.
So we're talking about the pod feeders, we really have to be aware about, especially in food quality or seed beans, making sure we understand the pod feeding. And we get to 10% pod feeding, which isn't very much, we can start dinging our yields and seed quality. So those would be things like bean leaf beetles, stink bugs, grasshoppers that feed on the pods. Right now, we're actually hitting a pretty good time of the year to educate the attendees today about spider mites. We went through a pretty dry period in June in a lot of the state of Michigan. Now we've had some recent rains and maybe alleviated some of the pressure of the spider mites, but they're still out there. We're teaching them what to look for, and that's also a part of our session today, is getting a magnifying glass, understanding different populations and when to go out and start spraying insecticides and what type of insecticides to treat them with.
Missy Bauer is the M in B&M Crop Consulting. Her presentation involved throwing hula hoops into an early growth soybean plot, taking measurements with a yardstick, and doing some math, all under the guise of population management. The lesson and discussion centered around mapping of acreage and the benefits of variable rate seeding.
Well, what we're looking at actually in these small plots was just how to make sure we evaluate early season stand counts. So we had to simulate this in July by doing some late plantings. But the reason we want to make sure they're evaluating their stand counts early in the season is we're really trying to do a better job of dialing in soybean populations. So we've been doing a lot of work through our test plot programs the last couple years on looking at the opportunity for variable rate planting in soybeans, and have really found that as we change things in different soil types, we have an opportunity to really pull soil types back as far as the population. So we might be swinging populations in any given field maybe from as low as 100,000 to as high as maybe 180 or 190,000. And we're doing that by soil characteristics. So where we've got the good parts of our field where we got high organic matters, high exchange capacities, our beans tend to get real big, real growthy. And so what we want to do there is actually pull the populations back and have lower populations, and we tend to increase yields. On the other parts of our field, maybe the sandier soils, we got to keep our populations a little bit higher. So we're actually varying the rate now as we go across the field when we're planting.
Christy Sprague is a professor and extension specialist at Michigan State University. She was on hand to talk about how weed control has changed over the past couple of years, with more on the way. She outlined the trends of weed resistance and how to manage or delay infestations.
So this year was a pretty difficult year because we were so dry in many parts of the state. So a lot of what we would consider as our soil applied or residual type products, a lot of them didn't work so well because the rainfall just wasn't there to incorporate them in to help control the weeds. So we've had some difficulty controlling some weeds, and some of the ones that have really reared their ugly head are a lot of the glyphosate resistant weeds. So things like horseweed, mare's tail, people call them mare's tail, We've gotten a lot of calls the last couple of weeks on water hemp showing up in different parts of the state. So a lot of these resistant weeds are really rearing their ugly head. So today what we're going to talk about is pretty much what are some of our better steps to manage them, and basically also to talk about diagnostics. So we've got a lot of soybean fields where there's a lot of weed escapes. With the Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee, they've actually done a great job in helping to sponsor herbicide resistance screening through the diagnostic clinic. Dr. Erin Hill is on board there to do those screenings. So we'll talk a little bit about, as you're going through your fields this fall, trying to figure out what weeds you may want to collect some samples on and get them tested for resistance.
There are links to MSU's herbicide-resistant weed form and the Soybean Cyst Nematode analysis form at michigansoybean.org. Both services are free to growers, thanks to soybean checkoff dollars through the Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee.